How you get closer to love? How you eliminate all your sadness when you opening up? How you make excuses for billionaires you broken up? But sunny niggas around me rolling up and smoking me up. Because my rainforest cries. Everybody dies a little. And I just wanna dance tonight. And I just wanna dance tonight. Yeah, he my little baby Medusa, tipping the juice up. I go back and forth in a Uber, travel for 2 months. I'm the emptiest hallelujah. Open my chest up, it's a rabbit inside my hat. Angel all dressed up, looking to bless up at the milk and the honey gates. I make money for money's sake. I've been writing 100 days to the wretched out the earth and called it baby for none. I know my shoulder blades are shattered wings that carry me home. I said, baby, come on. You know this flesh is only temporary, brittle as bone. Why don't you empty out your love for me, then chisel the stone? These are 10 black commandments, a property loan. Cause every blade of grass or earth we don't actually own. I am the I am, says Sam, am I? The universe bleeds infinity, you got one life. Yeah, how you get closer to love? How you eliminate all your sadness when you opening up? How you make excuses for billionaires you broken up? But sunny niggas around me rolling up and smoking me up. Because when rainforest cries, everybody dies a little. Everybody dies a little. I just wanna dance tonight. I just wanna dance tonight. If you think you love me, then bury me when the sun up. Faded with the homie, he purling another blunt up. Talking to Muhammad like niggas don't really trust us. Dying on stolen land for $1 like that ain't fucked up. It's fuck they money. I'ma say it every song until the revolution coming, all the feds start running. Fuck a Goodwill Hunting, this is brand new murder. Revolutionary suicide, then close the curtain. And you ain't seen death, I can hear the blood on the moon. These niggas put a flag up on it, all they do is consume. Only animal to ravage everything in its path. They turned a natural resource into a bundle of cash. Made the world anti-black, then divided the class. Now the rich niggas is rich niggas with showbread, really bitch niggas with big figures. Some cokeheads, these bitches is cokeheads, man. Fuck a billionaire. How you get closer to love? How you eliminate all your sadness when you opening up? How you make excuses for billionaires you broken up? But sunny niggas around me rolling up and smoking me up. Because when rainforest cries, everybody dies a little. Everybody dies a little. And I just wanna dance tonight. I just wanna dance tonight. I'm ready, 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 this sound like Mississippi sippy cup. Baby turn Bibby up. Henny invented the catalyst for happiness in my cup. This sound like kiddies on the playground. Mama was running up. Ooh, you about to get your ass beat. This sound like niggas complaining when they bitches like Raspy. B2K in the stereo, we juke in the backseat or juke in the basement. In love with my K-Swiss. This feel like jumping in the pool and I'm knowing I can't swim. Ooh, you about to get your ass beat for stealing that $20 like baby just ask me. Mama said she loved us. When the lights was off, we had to stay with cousins. Granny at the BBQ with Piddy as husband. Summertime, city lights, shot town, my town, my town. After school matters like I'm needing that stipend right now. Kindergarten parking lot, got caught with the blunt like wow, wow. Run. Mama say come home before the street lights do. Ice cream on my front porch and my new Fubu and my A1s too. Watching my happy block, my whole neighborhood hit the diddy vibe.
Like growing out my clothes, with stars in my pocket, dreaming about making my hood glow. This sound like every place I would go if I could fly. This feel like every summertime. Fall asleep dreaming about all the places I could go, and every one of them feels so close, still chasing time.
And I am not a star, I am a meteor on a crash course towards Earth, across the cosmos versus Perseus, to the father of his birth, to tell the truth that I'm his real son. Get blocked, I'ma build one. Get blocked, I'ma build two. Hope that you see it's a staircase. Still pray for a fair day, where they give a fair race to the male Nate and the Dogons and the essays and the fair face. Keith H when I peel paint. Rain bars with a pink, blue, and a sea foam type of green hue, make a clear space. Stop overreacting, it's past my curfew, I'm out after 6. Happily making my accident. Mama gon' whoop on my ass again. Pray that I'm making my way before 8 and I might have to sneak in the back again. Hope that memorial trafficking. Hope that she's stopping for gas again. Girl, I just wanna relax again. Pray you gon' bring this shit back again. Pray you gon' bring this shit back again. I know.
right, y'all go ahead and get started.
Hello, hello, Okay, you got it? Sorry.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just wanted to introduce our moderator. Rebecca Bonhomme is a Black working class woman. As far as she can remember, Rebecca questioned societal norms and rebelled against fitting into the gender and race roles prescribed by society. She has always enjoyed and partook in service. As a parent of 3 Black boys, she decided to join the movement after the murder of Tamir Rice in 2014. This incident and others reminded Rebecca of her own personal experience with police when she was in high school. Rebecca Bonhomme has been a PACA organizer since 2017. In that short time, Comrade has been exposed to writings of various seminal leaders and influencers of Pan-Africanism and the Black liberation movement. Comrade is now able to put a name to the oppressive systems she has experienced throughout her life: capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy.
Thank you for that introduction. How is everyone doing? So I'm glad that everyone is here, and we're just gonna start to kind of give you some context about like what we'll talk about today and like the purposes of coming to this session, right? This event will consist of an intergenerational discussion between community organizers that support the call for community control of the police. The discussions will be focused on the need and understanding that building power and self-determination for women and non-gender binary people must be centered in our struggle. So, before we get started, we want to do land back acknowledgement, and I'm going to read some remarks from Total Liberation Collective. And we do this because we know that the lands that we're on right now in Washington, D.C. and the United States, so-called Americas, is stolen land from the indigenous people. Before DC became America's capital, the area was home to several indigenous groups with complex political and economic relationships. We would like to acknowledge that we are standing on the land of Nakintank people of the Pakitsewe Confederacy. This land was a major hub for trade and an area rich in natural resources. In fact, the Anacostia River is named after the Nekentuk, as it was mispronounced by colonizers as the Nocostans. The history of Turtle Island's indigenous people has been actively erased by its colonizers. It is up to us to learn their history. Thank you, and power to the people. Please follow Total Liberation Collective on Instagram. Their handle is TL Collective DC, one word. And we'll just take a couple of moments of silence to acknowledge who these lands really belong to. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the Alliance history of the Alliance, right? Of why we're here. I'm going to read you a statement here. The National Alliance is also known as the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, NARPAR, was founded in 1973 in Chicago, Illinois, to mount organized action against unjust treatment of individuals because of race or political beliefs. Its founding grew out of the struggle to free Angela Davis from a racist frame-up on murder charges surrounding the aborted attempt by Jonathan Jackson to free his brother, George Jackson, and the Soledad brothers in 1970. Over the years, the Alliance successfully campaigned for the release of many persons falsely charged and sentenced to death or to long prison terms. We campaigned to end the unjust imprisonment of Leonard Peltier and leaders of the Black Panther Party who remain in prison. From its inception, the Alliance has campaigned against police crimes committed primarily against the poor and people of color. The Alliance initiated a campaign to stop police crimes. Victims of those crimes and their families were actively involved. Police departments can either continue serving as a tool to control our communities, or our communities can take control of the police. Community control means serving a cornerstone of power from those who have used the police to terrorize and oppress Black, Puerto Rican, Chicano, Mexicano, Indigenous, and other oppressed communities. That is not another oversight, review, or accountability board that just answers to the city, fettered by conflicting interests and powerless to do more than provide advice. Community control gives direct path to implement a vision of safety made by the people. Whether the demand is for defunding, demilitarization, transparency, every police department, every police policy, every dollar spent on law enforcement, and every officer, chief, superintendent should be subject to the will of the people, not the other way around, as it is right now. The only way to ensure that the disjointed pleas of justice, accountability, and transparency can be backed by the power needed to make them possible is through democratic control of police through a civilian council. Okay, so that was a little bit more about the Alliance. Also, the full name of the Alliance is the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, and referred to as the Alliance, as I was doing in the before. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful speakers. We have 3 speakers that will talk about this topic, community control, and how it empowers women, trans, and gender non-conforming folks, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and read that. Give me 1 second to pull that up. Quisha Bradley. So I'm just gonna introduce all 3 of them, and then the way that I introduce them, they'll have their remarks, and they'll have about 15 minutes to give their remarks to each one of them. Quisha Bradley, pronoun she, her, is an organizer with Pan-African Community Action, also known as PACA. PACA is a grassroots group of African Black people organizing for community-based power in Washington, D.C. She began organizing with PACA in March 2017. Her wage work is designing and supporting global public health programs. She organizes with numerous community organizations whose missions range from adult workforce development for underserved African Black communities in DC and Prince George County, Maryland, youth empowerment and development in DC, immigration rights, and kicking ICE out of DC, supporting returning citizens in DC, international anti-war efforts, expanding political education in underserved African Black communities in DC, yay, PACA, to promoting international solidarity and advancing the role of women of color working in peace and security fields. Jasmine Salas, she, her, is an organizer living in Chicago. She was born in Virginia Beach, Virginia in 1991 to Puerto Rican mother and Dominican father. She grew up in St. Cloud, Florida, and moved to Chicago in 2014 to attend the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration. In 2015, she became involved in the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression as a tabler in Woodland. She became more deeply involved with the organization after graduating with her master's in 2016 and after the election of Donald Trump. Jasmine was elected co-chair in 2018. She has played a leading role in the Alliance's previous campaign for community control of the police through a Civilian Police Accountability Council, also known as CPAC, and the new campaign to enact the Empowering Communities for Public Safety ordinance. Jasmine has also been involved in campaigns demanding justice for Laquan McDonald and organizing rallies demanding justice for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. She is also the co-chair of Chicago Boricua Resistance. In 2020, Jasmine was published in These Times magazine. In her spare time, she enjoys the art of makeup, graphic design, listening to music, and spending time with the 2 dogs and 2 cats she co-parents with her partner. Welcome, Jasmine. And then our third panelist is going to be M. Adams, pronouns she, they, he, is a community organizer and co-executive director of Freedom Incorporated. Born and raised in Milwaukee, Adams has been in Madison since 2003. Adams' dad has been incarcerated most of her life, and she comes from a community that has been the extreme target of police violence. In March 2016, Adams' mother transitioned after fighting cancer and many forms of violence. Adams is also a parent and sees her family as a primary motivator for her work. As a queer Black person, Adams has developed and advocated for a strong intersectional approach in numerous important venues. Adams is a leading figure in the Take Back the Land movement. She presented before the United Nations for the Convention of Eliminating Racial Discrimination. She is a co-author of Forward from Ferguson and a paper on Black community control over the police. And she authored to Intersectionality Theory and Why Killing Unarmed Black Folks is a Queer Issue. Adams can regularly be seen in person on TV or in newspapers, giving presentations, testifying at city council meetings, and energizing crowds at protests. Welcome, panelists. I'm so glad that you all are here. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Quisha Bradley.
Great. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Rebecca, for the introduction. I am Quisha Bradley, and I'm going to start off with kind of a general framing or situationer before turning it over to our esteemed featured guests, Jasmine and M, to delve a bit deeper into today's topic. So we're all coming into this different space from different organizations, maybe different mindsets. So before, as we know, political education is important. So again, follow me on this journey as we talk a little bit about the origins and bringing it to today's topic. So what is colonialism? Colonialism is defined as control by one power over a dependent area or people, right? It occurs when one nation subjugates another, conquering its population and exploiting it, while often forcing its own language and cultural values upon its people. It always features a mother country or quote unquote metropole and a colony that is structured to benefit that mother country. So what are the benefits? We can go to the next slide. What are the benefits of colonialism for this metropole or colonial or mother country? You extract cheap labor to perform a broad range of functions and services. There's instances where the colonized people themselves are the natural resource. Just think about private prisons, think about charter schools, think about other government functions that are increasingly privatized only for the sake of profit, not for people or conservation of the planet. Low-end product dumping is also something that happens in colonies. So this can be bad produce, this can be rotting meat, anything that's not desirable from the mother country. Next slide, please. So colonialism isn't only this far off old school notion, right? Domestic colonialism is a thing. What does it mean? It means it's domestic or internal colonialism refers to the subjugation and exploitation of a group within a nation or country. At PACA, Pan-African Community Action, we believe African or Black people in the US are a domestic colony. The exploiters for cheap labor, resources, we get poor products dumped in our neighborhoods, in our bodies, all of the above. The colony is maintained and exploited using an occupying army, right? The police. And the police are an occupying force who protect the interests of the settler colonial power, the gentrifying political and economic elite. Next slide, please. So if colonialism isn't, well, let me recap. So to recap, under colonial rule, the metropole or mother country is exploiting the colony. No one agrees to become a colony. Therefore, colonialism is inherently non-consensual. So how are these colonies kept? And as we know, violence is often the mode that occupying armies use to keep persons in oppressive structures in place. So who are these occupying armies? We know by social science, anytime there's a private property and wealth in society, there must be police or some sort of force to protect the property and protect the wealth of those who have from those who have not. We can go to the next slide. So policing will always be necessary and inevitable in classes with private property. The quote unquote ruling class will always police for these reasons, given private property is what they want to protect, right? But policing as an idea isn't just about what they're trying to protect. So it's a matter, I know sometimes when we say community control of the police or CCOP, the wording or semantics for people, just the thought of policing is very detrimental and has a negative connotation. So one way that we can try to think about this is by protection, right? Like how community control protection, how are we protecting ourselves as individuals, as household, as communities, in what ways, what rights do we have to do that? Next, oh, I can give two examples. So two examples of police, I'm sure we all have examples, but just two examples because they're on the slide, are police enforcing identity-based privilege relationships, also obviously racially, but also down gender as well, right? I'm sorry, I'm trying to be mindful of time. Next slide, please. So conditions in a domestic colony. Within a domestic colony, there's a combination of benefits, right, in the form of profit and privilege that provide the material basis beyond attitudes and dispositions for maintaining an oppressive and exploitative system. We see who is the most marginalized, and not just in the US, in the domestic colonial context, but worldwide, right? Why is it always working class queer, genderqueer, non-binary people, women and children of color who are more likely to face evictions, food insecurity, houselessness, violence, poor or no access to healthcare, so on and so forth. This obsession or this connection with sex and hypersexualization is tied to the colonial logic that describes again, bringing it back to the domestic colonial framework that describes Black people in the US as primitive or hypersexual. It also notes like gender variance and anything other than cisgendered heterosexuality as quote unquote perverse or something other than or not right or something that needs to be cut out or die. We see this in the feminization and criminalization of sex work, right, which should be legal. We see this in the hypersexuality of Black women and Black girls. So ultimately, the only way for us to fully realize our human rights is to shift the onus of ensuring these rights away from the benevolence of those currently oppressing us into the hands of the people themselves, right? So human right is our first, like self-determination is our first human right. And just an example, again, when you think about, especially in the DC areas, I'm sure is the same for most cities in the world or in this country, is thinking about gentrification, right? Who that impacts the most, why, and how. So if police are called in to quote unquote clean up a neighborhood's image, the goal is really to protect and increase property value. This means harassing, displacing, and arresting houseless folks, sex workers, other marginalized peoples. Next slide, please. So how can we as members of a society help develop and organize ourselves into a world we want to see, right? So not asking the state for help, but looking in the mirror into our own communities to empower and organize the most impacted. So what must be done? We must assert our human right to self-determination. We must build a movement led by the most impacted. We must wage positive action campaigns as well. Next slide. So it's about creating structures of dual power, right? So dual power meaning there's two powers, one proletarian or democratic and one capitalistic. They're coexisting and competing for legitimacy during the transition away from capitalism. So in order to build directly democratic proletarian power, we need to build alternative, directly democratic institutions that enforce one another and more broadly, a directly democratic economic base. So this sounds way headier and way dense than it is because we do this already, right? Think about kids you may babysit in your neighborhood or in your building. Think about last year when the pandemic hit, how many of you weren't involved with either starting or supporting mutual aid efforts in your neighborhood, right? Whether that's picking up groceries for elders, whether that is translating something for neighbors who don't speak English as a first language. So this concept of collective care or building community power or creating structures that are legitimate and compete with current structures is not new. And it's something, again, we are all familiar with. Next slide, please. So community control really means fighting for self-determination and power. It means protecting our communities and care for our people. The ruling class and elites have their own police forces that protect their interests, their wealth, and help them gentrify. We must have our own structures led by the most impacted to serve the interests of the people. These structures will have to come about organically. We can't prescribe what they would look like by concepts we may or may not want to superimpose onto it, right? Examples of how this is done: participatory democracy or budgeting, hosting people's assemblies to see what is going on, organizing or setting up various caucuses, whether that's a youth caucus to highlight and focus on what youth issues are in communities. Next slide, please. So also, as we know, for those of us entering in this space, not new to CCOP, community control of the police is not new at all. It's rooted in a very, very deep Black radical Pan-Africanist history. A lot of us know it from what the work Panthers did, Black Panthers did. But also just thinking back in the 1950s, 1960s, when oppressed and exploited territories on the African continent, they weren't demanding colonizers have sensitivity training, right? They weren't demanding the occupying forces in their land comprise of a greater percentage of colonized subjects. The fundamental demand was to end colonization and implement self-determination. So no legitimate liberation movement demanded a defunding of an occupying army or to engage in a process with the colonizers to reimagine colonial occupation. It's important for us to think about this as we embrace the possibility of what community control of police or protection or of community safety could give way to, and just realizing it's definitely towards the path of a genuine revolutionary movement. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate, when we say community control of the police, it's not, from Pocket's perspective, it's not a matter of asking about police training or body cams or anything from the state. It's really about power over the forces that impact our lives, period, right? And what is power? This is a definition we like to use. It's the ability to implement or enact an idea, belief, will, opinion, plan, or decision in the capacity to protect the outcome. So now is the time to shift power into the hands of working class people of color, particularly women, particularly LGBTQI folks. So it's important for us to look at ourselves as well as we do this work in this movement. So how are we radically organizing ourselves and others? What's our organization's gender analysis, if one exists, right? And I don't mean tokenizing our queer gender nonconforming members, but really taking a look at lived experiences and working that into our campaigns and the literature we put out. So forums like this are important, right? As well as back and forth, like rigorous debate in political education is crucial in helping us upend stereotypes and helping us understand and navigate the world around us, right? To build self-esteem, to bring back humanity and dignity into ourselves and to our own communities. Next slide, please. That's it. So with that, I will end with a quote by Frank Chapman. Community control over the police is our democratic right to determine who polices our communities and how they are policed. So with that, I will turn it over to Jasmine to take us a little bit more into today's topic. But please stay in touch with PACA at PACA DMV on all social medias. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. So really thankful for that to ground us in today's discussion. And I want to thank the DC Alliance for inviting me to speak on such an important topic. I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Jasmine Salas. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Chicago Alliance, the Chicago branch of the National Alliance. And before I proceed, I just want to give a quick content warning. I will be discussing sexual assault and stories of survivors, which may be triggering or upsetting for some folks. So I just want to put that out there. The liberation of women, trans, and gender nonconforming folks is essential for the liberation of all oppressed people. And I'm honored to be here tonight discussing how community control of the police will empower us on our pathway to overthrowing the systems that oppress us. And this conversation is also extremely timely. Just 1 week ago, the Chicago police announced an investigation of Officer Robert Baker based on allegations of sexual misconduct and aggravated sexual assault that allegedly occurred in January 2017. Officer Baker first gained notoriety because he was a subject of an earlier investigation due to his ties to the Proud Boys. And that investigation resulted in a 5-day suspension that he has not served yet. Officer Baker is not the only officer accused of sexual assault. I met a woman named Trina Townsend, a Black woman, at a Chicago Police Board meeting in 2018. She was testifying about the sexual assault she faced by Officer Kevin Glover that began when she was just 14. Trina shared her painful story. She had seen Officer Glover in her community, and one day she decided to flag him down and told him about sexual abuse that she was facing by her father and other men on her block. Instead of helping Trina, Officer Glover drove to an alley and proceeded to sexually assault her. He sexually assaulted her on a monthly basis for years, until Trina grew into her early 20s. Decades later, Trina ran into one of Officer Glover's partners who admitted he knew about the officer's pattern of sexually assaulting young women. This inspired Trina and an organization in Chicago called the Women's All Points Bulletin to start the #Cops2 campaign locally to raise awareness about sexual assault at the hands of the police. Sexual assault investigations are carried out by the Chicago Police Bureau of Internal Affairs, one of two of the city's investigative bodies for police misconduct. Complaints received by Internal Affairs are investigated by the perpetrator's immediate supervisor or by an Internal Affairs Division personnel. So either way, it's a member of law enforcement. Sexual assault survivors will need to retell their stories to another police officer, and having a fellow officer investigate sexual assault cases leads to extremely high bias. Most cases, between 80% and 90% of sexual assault and abuse reports made in the last decade are purged from the system with no justice. The 10 to 20% of survivors who did receive justice had to wait weeks or months for the arrest of their abuser, longer than other victims of violent crimes. The federal consent decree filed in 2019 requires that Chicago move sexual assault complaints into the hands of the second investigative body, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. This would require a change to the legislation that established COPA, and the City Council has not taken any action. The Fraternal Order of Police, a police union, is lobbying against this and lobbies against civilian oversight overall, including in response to instances of sexual assault. Just to give you an example, an Illinois law that was passed in 2017 titled the Sexual Assault Incident and Procedure Act would have required independent investigations of sexual assault crimes. But the FOP in Chicago lobbied and created a special exception for the Chicago Police Department. Police officers are well aware that their colleagues commit sexual assault and are also unlikely to take action when the perpetrator is a community member. In March, just to give you a recent example that made me sick to my stomach, in March, reports surfaced of a 10-year-old girl who suffered a string of brutal sexual assaults. The police took months to arrest one of the 5 assailants, claiming a lack of evidence despite 3 existing rape kits. And I will say, on the topic of rape kits, there is a massive backlog from sexual assault survivors due to a lack of transparency within the system, with some survivors waiting 2 years for their kits to be tested. Trans and gender non-conforming folks are more vulnerable to facing sexual assault, including by police officers. Officers have been accused of sexually harassing trans folks and sex workers with little to no justice. Police officers have also been known to misgender trans people while in custody and use transphobic terms to humiliate folks. And let's just be clear, misgendering is not just painful, it's also deeply traumatic and adds another layer of trauma to already being in police custody. Aisha Love, a trans woman who was in police custody, told the Chicago Tribune in 2019 that she was harassed by officers when she was in custody, and the officers even asked if they could strip search her. Now, the Chicago Police does have a TIGN policy, which is trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming policy. The original TIGN policy did not lead to much change in practice, but a recently updated version of the policy requires police to use correct pronouns and names and not question individuals' gender or sexual genitals. And it's unclear as to whether this updated policy will have an impact of the trans people in police custody. But beyond sexual assault cases, women and trans folks are still the victims of police violence. The Chicago police made headlines in December 2020 after footage of a raid that occurred in 2019 on Anjanette Young's house was released to the public. Anjanette was getting ready for bed after a long day of work as a social worker when the police burst into her home with their guns drawn. She was handcuffed while completely nude and pleaded with officers that they had the wrong home. Mayor Lori Lightfoot tried to cover up the crime by attempting to block the release of the footage. And Jeanette and her legal team weren't even given all of the footage that the city had until they went to court. And of course, women are also the victims of police shootings. Rekia Boyd, Angelique Stiles, and Betty Jones were all killed by the Chicago police. And nationally, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, and countless others have been murdered by police. And it's not just police shootings, it's also police torture. As folks may know, Chicago is the epicenter of police torture. And typically, and very wrongfully, when people talk about torture survivors, they will usually use male-centered language, which is incorrect. We know that men, women, folks of all genders have been tortured by the police. And just to give you an example, when LaTanya Jennifer Sublett was 19 years old, she went to an Area 2 police station to provide information to detectives about a crime. Police actually thought that she herself committed the crime and tortured her for 12 hours until she signed a false confession. She said at a Chicago Alliance event in 2018 that she thought she was doing the right thing by going down to the police station to turn in evidence. But that led to her serving 21 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit. She is released today. She is out and she is an activist with the Chicago Torture Justice Center for women who have endured police torture and fighting to create a movement that includes all victims of police torture. Many themes emerge from the context and the history that I just laid out, but I want to name a few and specifically discuss how community control of the police would end them. First, police officers clearly still operate with impunity. As was discussed earlier, the police are an occupying force in our communities, and Chicago is no exception, especially on the south side and the west side of the city, which is majority Black and majority Brown, Latino. The Blue Wall of Silence works to protect officers who have committed sexual assault and torture. And in fact, none of the officers that I've mentioned have faced any jail time or any accountability, nor have the systems that enable their abuse been changed to prevent sexual assault from happening to more women, trans, or gender non-conforming folks. Nothing at all has significantly changed. It's clear that under capitalism, the police cannot and will not investigate themselves. Secondly, the police have a history of violence towards women, gender non-conforming, and trans people. Nationally, 40% of the police have been involved in domestic violence cases. How can we expect officers to serve and protect when they don't even protect their own families? And diversifying the police force does not help. We must begin exploring alternatives to policing, thinking outside of public safety more broadly to include trained professionals like social workers. And our new ordinance, the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance, specifically sets some powers aside to investigate alternatives and fund them. And we must fire officers who have a known pattern of sexual misconduct, misogyny, and transphobia. Community control of the police, to paraphrase Frank, gives us the power to determine who polices our communities, normal racist, sexist, and transphobic cops, and how our communities are policed, what policies are put in place. When the community is put in charge, we can instill a sense of urgency because we can hold police officers and this racist system accountable. And our movement must be inclusive of women, trans, and gender non-conforming people to ensure we are including the voices of everyone who is impacted by police impunity. The ECPS ordinance, through a binding referendum to voters in 2022, would ultimately create a council that could hire and fire cops, appoint the chief of COPA, the investigative body that I pointed to earlier, and the police superintendent, and have a say in negotiating the FLP contract and the police budget. All of these would empower gender minorities. And this is kind of just a fact about the FLP contract. Currently, the FOP contract allows officers to delay questioning for 24 to 48 hours after claims of misconduct, giving officers a clear advantage. For sexual assault survivors who often feel pressure to corroborate their stories with every ounce of evidence, this is unfair and completely unacceptable. We cannot beg officers to change. We cannot beg for more training. We cannot beg for body cameras. We cannot beg for window dressing and minor superficial changes. We must demand community control of the police. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And so we must demand community control and we must take control over the police. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine, so much for your words. And now we're gonna go on to M. I want to take this. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. I'm M. Adams. Again, I use any and all pronouns said respectfully. And I don't know about you, but I am fired up after hearing those last two presenters. I was over here clapping and shouting and standing up and pumping my fist. So I'm like fired up and hope that I can be focused, though my energy is quite booming. So just shout out to the incredible leaders who spoke before me. So yeah, I'm in the right room. I'm in the right room. So I seek to add to those comments or to extend the comments as formally laid out by both presenters. And in order to get where I ultimately want to go, which is demonstrating to you all the necessity of what folks are describing as centering survivors, centering women and girls, queer, trans, intersex folks in the struggle toward community control more broadly, and centering folks in the struggle for liberation. In order to get there, like any good scientist, I want to go back to making sure that we fully and comprehensively understand the issues or the root problems. So oftentimes when we approach the question of colonialism, people think about white supremacy, which is, correct. White supremacy is certainly a major issue, certainly a huge force driving colonialism. But also there is capitalism as well as patriarchy that create, that shape, that drive colonialism. And I want to spend a little bit of time discussing patriarchy. So it is a old adage, an old Black feminist adage that says you have to center the people most impacted in order to bring about the change you seek, in order to bring about the new change that you want in the world. And I think that's true, one, just because of the practice of being inside of communities and knowing that there's just the incredible value and witnessing the incredible leadership of women and girls, of queer, trans, intersex folks who are consistently putting their lives on the line, who are doing the unseen, unspoken about, uncompensated labor of rearing up families, of caring for one another, of caring for communities, etc. So I offer that as part of the evidence, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the science of why that also is true, giving a thorough or deep understanding of patriarchy. So patriarchy shows up inside of the prison industrial complex. I would go as far as to say that it creates and shapes the prison industrial complex. And we know that the prison industrial complex serves the role inside of colonialism as being a profit center where our bodies are abused, misused, and labor is extracted from that, wealth is extracted from that, and profit is made and created from that. And we see, and we can evidence that in a number of ways, right? So we see that by seeing the ways that folks who are incarcerated are made to make clothing for Victoria's Secret or forced to make license plates for the state. And we saw recently within the last few years, the way that Black and brown bodies in particular were forced to go out into California and help put out the wildfires. So we're forced to take on very dangerous labor on behalf of the state, but that is not a job they could get um, without being incarcerated. So we can see the ways in which our bodies are used and extracted for profit. But I want to talk about how patriarchy creates those conditions and maintains those conditions, and how we then as survivors must resist those conditions. So the prison industrial complex is a patriarchal system. It uses the same logic. Patriarchy uses the same logic of domination, of hierarchical structures, in particular. And one of the ways that patriarchy does its business, one of the insidious ways that patriarchy does its business, is by making these things appear natural or normal or biological, in that is the way it is supposed to go. And so patriarchy inside of the prison industrial complex is evidenced and shown by the terrible sexual violence committed by police officers and wardens and other administrators and actors of the prison industrial complex, as mentioned by our former speaker. And having this analysis of patriarchy not only allows us to see what is happening to women and girls, queer, trans, and intersex folks, which is often made invisible. When people think about the prison industrial complex, they don't always think about women and girls, queer, trans, and intersex folks who are incarcerated. Not only does it allow us to see those survivors, but it also allows us to think more fully about the ways that the prison industrial complex is acting out violence toward our community. So it does it in the strip search, right? Sexual violence inside of the strip searches. It does it. It does it by positioning the warden, positioning the sheriffs, positioning the police, positioning the head of the militaries as seen as fathers and therefore having dominion over the rest of us as supposed children, right? That is a patriarchal logic. It does it by continuing to have extractive practices against the environment, right? So patriarchal logic says that it has the right to extract, take without consent, both from our bodies as well as to the environment. And I'll just quickly say, we are nearly at the brink of a climate catastrophe, nearly at the brink of existence due to a climate crisis created by particular human beings, and it is worsening as we speak. Patriarchy shows up also in several other ways, right? In saying that men should have and continue to have dominion over women and girls, queer, trans, and intersex folks, which is why survivors are not protected by the prison industrial complex. I'll give you an example of our work here in Madison, Wisconsin. There was a survivor named Sierra Finkley. At the time, she was roughly 24 years old, and had a daughter who was about 5 years old. And she was in a she was trying to escape a very, very violent and abusive relationship. She had called the police several times that day to get support and safety for her and her daughter. They ignored her several times. This is documented. The person comes and tries to run her over with the car. Her and her daughter, they run into a house. They go upstairs, her house, they go upstairs. They close the door. He breaks down the door. He comes up, and in a struggle for her life, as she's protecting herself and her daughter, he dies as a result of that incident, as a result of that altercation. And of course, the police show up right away to arrest her, because the police are there not only acting out of anti-Blackness, but they are also acting out patriarchy, right? Seeing that not only is this person Black and not seen as human, and therefore not having a self-worthy of defense, according to the eyes of the state, according to the eyes of the metropole, but this person is also challenging a man. This person is also asserting their rights, their dignities against a man. And so double jeopardy, as described by many Black feminists, and so is definitely not seen as worthy of protection, and not able to defend herself, defend her child's life because of that. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit more about other ways in which we see the logics of patriarchy, the evidence of patriarchy, the way that patriarchy is shaping the colonial experience, as the first speaker talked about, that we are having, right? So I mentioned, and I hinted to, and so did the former speaker, about the role of rape in colonization. So there has been no colonization that has ever happened without the presence of rape. If we look at the Black or African experience and the way that colonization affected us through the transatlantic slave trade and its legacy that we still experience today, prison industrial complex and other manifestations, extreme rape, extreme sexual violence, and extreme reproductive violence are key, are integral to how that happens. There could be no transatlantic slave trade. There could not be a continual chattel enslavement without the direct colonization of particular bodies, right? Without the direct colonization of wounds and seeing wounds as sites, capitalist sites, or for capitalist enterprises for profit, without the extreme hypergendering of Black masculinity, of Black femininity, without the continued abuses or the continued ways in which children were not seen as children, children were not seen as people, not seen as having rights or dignity, also a logic of patriarchy. And this colonization, this form of colonization, patriarchal colonization, is still happening to us inside of the prison industrial complex. And policing is a primary aggressor of how that violence happens to us. It is not a coincidence that police, they say the number one, police are one of the number one community groups or identity groups that have one of the highest rates of domestic violence or sexual violence. They say something like, and I can find this when we get to the question and answer section, the exact data, but they say close to 60% of police officers have committed or have a reported incidents of domestic violence or sexual violence. That is not a coincidence. That is a result of patriarchy being embedded deeply inside of that system, as well as shaping colonization and colonialism altogether. So because patriarchy is such a primary way that violence, domination, colonialism is happening to us as Black folks, we as all Black folks, right? All Black folks are impacted by patriarchy, and we are all the sites, Black genders are all of our Black genders are the sites of extreme violence as it relates to white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, and sites of extreme exploitation. Therefore, we must seriously fight to end patriarchy as a necessary prerequisite to getting to community control. I maintain that there can be no community control as long as there is still patriarchy, as long as there is still white supremacy, as long as there is still capitalism. So community control then, to me, as a Black leftist, feminist materialist, as a Black trans feminist, to me then it means directly taking, and shout out just to the other speakers who've already said this, at this point I'm just reiterating, but that means directly contesting for power. It means directly contesting for dual and competing power. It means taking back our power. It means directly wrestling the power out of the hands of the state, directly wrestling our resources out of the hands of the state, directly wrestling out the authority out of the hands of the state to shape and dictate our lives. And that is the way of survival for survivors. We as survivors can no longer wait and hope that someone else is going to do us good or act kindly on our behalf. Instead, we have to fundamentally end not only our communal subjugation, but also have to, as survivors, empower ourselves and directly wrestle with moving into positions of power, being comfortable with power, to be able to determine fully and completely what happens to us and force the adherence of what we want to happen to us. And so I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to the three panelists that shared with us. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me. Everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yes, thank you so much for those words. You all gave a very rounded perspective of what we're talking about today. And so we'll go into the questions. First, we're going to ask questions that were submitted before today, and then we'll go into the Q&A box as much as possible. And some of them, there's some repeating questions, so I'll combine those so that we can try to get as much questions as possible. So this question, I would like for Jasmine and Em to attempt to respond to. And the question is, how does community control of police affect decriminalization and decarceration? Are these two, hold on, I want to make sure are these two separate projects or one and the same? I'll ask one more time and also put it in the chat. How does community control of police affect decriminalization and decarceration? Are these two separate projects or one and the same?
All right. It's a great question. I think they're one and the same. I think when we look at police in our society, police are the cutting edge of white supremacy. Before folks see a jail cell, they see a police officer. And I think oftentimes, especially if we want to put a more theoretical framework in it, the way that police officers are essentially implementing policy in the community, they're street level bureaucrats. So I think keeping in mind that police officers are often putting their own interpretations of the law into effect. But community control of the police gives the community a way to end that. It puts the community in charge. And so definitely being able to kind of limit some of those experiences, being able to remove corrupted police officers from the police force, especially ones who have a known pattern and practice of committing abuses, is definitely the first step. Again, I don't think community control is the end all be all, but I think it is a necessary first step to beginning to overthrow all the systems that harm us: capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, etc.
Thank you, Jasmine. Em, you want to add to that?
I see decriminalization and decarceration as strategies that people are using now to weaken the prison industrial complex. And I think they're viable strategies. I think insofar as people can actually organize and get people out of jail today, or people can organize and reduce the ways that people can be captured and forced into the prison industrial complex or forced into incarceration. I think, folks should organize that. I've had direct experience in organizing around decarceration, organizing to get Black people out of the local jail here. And so, again, I see decriminalization and decarceration as strategies that we can organize people around right now, around the way that they're experiencing the prison industrial complex is a viable way to build base and actually help with the day-to-day living conditions of our folks. I think they're not enough by themselves. So I don't see them in competition, or I don't see them as antithetical to where we're trying to get with community control. I see them as incomplete steps on their own. And so I see them as ways that we can begin to bring our folks in as we continue to build power and directly wrestle for direct political control and direct community control.
Just to piggyback on that, and this is kind of to a question that's in the Q&A box as well about some mischaracterization of what community control of the police is. And we each have slightly different, community control, we've kind of reiterated the similar points. I will say, and Paka's kind of framing of this, what we see is exactly what Em is talking about. And that's why I love the verbiage used, because it really is wrestling powers away. It really is not just demanding, but fighting to get that control from the community, from an independent grassroots, as someone put in there. We're not opposed to what that question is, but from Paka's position, one thing ultimately we would like to set up, and we're in the very beginning stages of this now, because community control, like any formal good organizing, will take time. But something we have on the docket is having citizens really people in the community determine priorities and policies and practices. So right now, if I'm houseless and I'm just trying to get some rest, I see a bench, I sleep on it, that's illegal, right? The goal of community control is for your community to decide it is not illegal for somebody to sleep. This is not harming me. it is not illegal for public urination. Sure, it's peeing on the side of a building, which is private property, which has major ramifications in the current system we're in. But it's really about reimagining, restructuring how we see society from the most impacted, from the community, which again, it's so important to organize to a science, and it's so important to have this political education so you don't end up putting members of the community in power who are going to accidentally fall into the same neocolonial or capitalist processes.
Thank you so much, Keisha. So we got a couple of questions in the chat that kind of get to the idea of why use the current structure systems that are oppressing us to try and, you know, or I guess organize the community, get power, organize ourselves. So I'm gonna ask those two questions kind of as one. I know the panelists have kind of touched on it, but if you want to add any additional comments to those questions. So there's two questions here. I'll start with the shorter one. I'm sorry, I think I still don't understand. This is from an anonymous, you know, we don't need just the question. I'll go with the question. I'm sorry, I think I still don't understand. What I'm asking is, what is the end goal? Why does it make sense to take control over an occupying force when this won't shift the people in power? So that's the first, you know, question. And then there's a similar question. I'm just going to read it here. If colonialism is grounded by violence, does that not mean that a democratic effort to retrieve power from the state will result in a neo-colonial setup? All power should be grounded in independent grassroots formations, responding to the need for safety, not through a democratic petitioning of the state to bestow quote unquote power over a police force under the behest of the state. So anyone who wants to take that, it's kind of similar questions. Go ahead.
I can start. Okay, so yes, the police are an occupying force. As far as we have the police right now and understand the police right now, I'm against that. I am against that policing department. I'm against the way that police and the policing history of the United States. So in that sense, this thing would be abolished. What's challenging here is because we're kind of using the same words over and over again. So policing departments as we know it, at least in my vision of the future, would be abolished. They would not exist. You wouldn't be able to call this 911 and get Officer Dan Wilson who shows up. That's not what we would have. I'm envisioning something completely different. Now, what I do think is going to be necessary in that new world and that thing that we're building, and this is perhaps where we'll debate about if we think that is policing, quote unquote, or not, is I do think we're still going to need some sort of organized force led and driven by the people to ensure safety. And I don't mean safety the way that the current gender racial capitalist system understands it, right? I'm not talking, as Quisha said, about somebody pissed on the side of a building and now you're going to come beat them. I'm not talking about that. I am a leftist, right? And I have ideas that are not yet made popular. So what I mean by safety is ensuring that if somebody's attacking a trans woman, there's somebody who can come and stop the attack. What I'm saying by safety is if women and girls or whoever, queer, trans, intersex people are being harmed or beat up, or even other Black men are being attacked or hurt, or what happens when the white supremacists are mad that we won and they want to come shoot you up. I'm saying that there needs to be an organized grouping, people of defense that communities can activate in defense of those most vulnerable, in defense of those who are being attacked. And I do think our gains and wins are going to have to be defended. So that is what I'm thinking about when I'm like community control over police, that is about getting rid of what we have and building the thing that I'm now describing. So that is what I envision and that is what I see.
Agreed. And I think I don't know if it's on us, for those of us who are talking about community control of the police, to really be even more clear, because I feel like this mischaracterization comes up a lot of like, why would you take over a police department and blah, 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 blah. But like, obviously, we cannot work with the same structures, goals, personnel priority, none of that. So just ditto and agree to what Em just said.
Okay, thank you. If Jasmine, you don't have anything, I'm gonna peruse through the Q&A. There's similar questions that are still being posed around how can you take control of the current police force. But Em and Quisha and Jasmine as well, I believe that you did answer that. So I'm gonna try and go to some different questions here. This one was answered. All right, so this one is for comrades here that have differing opinions about community control over the police versus abolish the police, defund the police, etc. What organizations are you members of, and how in your political work have you had success? I'm gonna ask it one more time. For comrades here that have differing opinions about community control of the police versus abolish the police, defund the police, etc., what organizations are you members of, and how in your political work have you had success? Jasmine, if you can go take this one.
Yeah, I'm a little unclear about this question, so I'll just interpret it and answer. I think, so for us in the Chicago Alliance, we work with abolitionists, we work with the Defund CPD campaign, we are a member and endorser of that campaign. We work very closely with Black Lives Matter Chicago, which is an abolitionist organization. We work with abolitionist folks who see that community control of the police is an abolitionist demand and is a necessary first step towards getting us to abolition. And so we've had a lot of success in that area. We've also been able to work more closely with abolitionists through our work supporting the survivors of police torture and police crimes and their families, and doing prison support work that way. Doing that like on the ground, grassroots level, mobilizing folks to court hearings, and being able to really support each other. For us, our position has always been, defunding and abolition is a slogan without a program. And so we need to have a political program that is community control of the police to really get this in motion. As somebody said in the chat, I believe, you can't abolish what you don't control. And if the police if the police don't investigate themselves, they sure as hell are not going to abolish themselves.
To piggyback, I also didn't 100% understand this question, but I'll just say what we found successful, and also answer another question about where to start, what to do. So as my comrade Max put in the chat, step one is definitely engaging the community in discussion, right? About power. People have to understand what that means. We have to get common language. What is it? Unity presupposes organization, right? So we need to get on the same page with what we're using and making sure we're not losing people. Because those are the people we need. We need everybody, but we certainly need to be led and reach out aggressively to the most impacted. So it's one thing we found successful is with PACA, we're based in DC. We do our organizing work in Southeast DC. For those who do not know, it is a predominantly Black, predominantly lower income area. So we decided that that was going to be one of our community bases to really organize an apartment building. So we're organizing a complex, like a building complex. And again, it's about starting small. There's no one way to do it. It's going to depend on the culture of your organization. It's going to depend on your state, what's popping in your city. But the main thing is to start, right? And you, again, political education, engaging the community the most impacted. So not just the people who have the time or the internet or the computer to join us by Zoom, but going out to where we are, where we most need help. And the voices need to be heard more clearly.
Thank you. So there's another, do you want to answer? Do you want to add something, Em?
I was going to actually respond to some of what I see in the chat, and then the question you asked before. So I'm going to respond to a couple of things. So
yeah, there's a lot coming up.
The first thing I think is a question you might have asked already, which is around, well, how are we going to use, if we recognize that policing under gendered racial capitalism is an occupying force, and then how, and then therefore sort of the facade of our existing democratic quote unquote structures, basically how can we think we're going to win any real change using those systems, right? If we struggled for community control over policing on the ballot, wouldn't it just produce another neoliberal entity? So if that is all we did, the answer is yes. So I know we are not going to outright, win community control by a ballot alone. I know that very well. I also know that given the empire that we're up against, they're really advanced weaponry, really advanced technology, really advanced in ways that they're unified with other major global powers around the world. Sorry, I got a puppy in the back doing a thing. But I know that we are far past the days where militia is going to win it, where we think we can just, go home and each get our own little guns and think that we're going to storm the state and win that way. So I think I'm saying that to say, I think it's going to take a multitude of strategy, a multitude of tactics, and a really, really sophisticated strategy. I think we're going to see several things happening. And one of those things is going to be a direct contest for political power over the state's arms. And I think that that's going to happen in the electoral arena. I think it's going to happen over policy. And I also think it's going to happen inside of budgets. I think Black folks are going to be resisting and trying to wrestle and get a hold of this thing any which way we can. I think it's going to require all of it, as well as other sort of, I'll say, revolutionary and creative tactics that we need not speak about here. And just to respond to some of what is coming up around why are we saving policing? I think, just to quickly characterize it, I'm not saving this iteration of policing. In fact, I think I'm actively and aggressively working against it. What I am saying and asserting is, in this new world, you can call it whatever you want to call it. You don't have to call it policing. You can call it grandma's defense groups, whatever. I'm saying, in this new world, there needs to be organized force that can force people to adhere to the social phenomena that we want. I do think that individual self-defense is important, but I think it's limited and not enough, right? Everybody doesn't have the same capacity to defend themselves. What happens if there's a rule of majority and it's a minority? And this is a whole bunch of stuff, right? I think we're going to need a centralized, coordinated force. I'm using the word force very clearly and deliberately, who can carry out the will of the people. The word that I know to use right now for that is policing, but we can name it whatever we want to name it, right? Again, we can call it the survivor's crew that's going to come bust you in the head. Fine, whatever you call it. But I do think that that's important. And just to speak directly, I am not nonviolent. I'm not anti-violence. I think we're going to need violence that we can control and wield in this new world. I think we're going to need coordinated violence to defend ourselves. And so I do think there's a need to think about how we're going to wrestle out how we're going to weaken the state's ability to use its monopoly of violence against us, and how we will develop our own to protect ourselves in it and enforce our will and agenda.
Agreed. And just to I see time is going, but just to touch on something else in the Q&A about why through policing, this is just, as M said, I love speaking after you, M. I'm like, ditto to M. What M said. It's going to take a multitude of strategies, of tactics, of organizations, of formations, of individuals. But it's not just community control of our protection, of our safety, of police. Ideally, my vision is a larger community control of education, community control of healthcare, community control of food security. You know what I mean? Like, it's what has the state done to date for us, for the most impacted. So it's really going to take us, again, having these discussions when mischaracterizations or semantics come up, us being able to discuss that. So thank you to the person going in the chats. This is great. This is what it's going to take. Also, thank you to Debloy for the amazing ASL interpretation, because language is also important, right? How are we engaging various people of this conversation, making it easy for all to understand?
Thank you, Jasmine. I don't know if you have some quick comments to that, but I do want to get some questions about, like, you know, the topic, like how does CCOP empower cis women, trans women, and gender non-conforming folks, because this is why we are here. And this this discussion around, like, why through policing, I think we've you all have responded well to that, as well as other folks in the chat. So we're going to go on and shift in the last as we wind down. And there's a question about, you know, empowering those most, you know, marginalized, most pushed out, like, by the larger capitalist society, as well as within, you know, African Black communities, wherever they are. What can placing gender variant people on community control boards do to dismantle this feature that is inherent to policing, is also cultural safe from symbolic representation, that's culturally safe from symbolic representation? And we'll start with that one. Does anybody want to take that? Maybe Jasmine, do you want to start with this, maybe? Thank you.
Sure. I'm just reading the question over a couple times.
Yeah, the first part we kind of answered, so I just kind of jumped to the second part. So yeah, sorry
okay.
about that. Yeah.
No problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely, for one thing, putting gender variant folks on control boards, on boards that have actual authority over the police, is critical. And I think putting folks who have the lived experiences of being a woman, of being a trans person, of being a gender non-conforming person, and using that to inform the policy that you shape, using that to inform the police budget that you're overseeing, using that to inform essentially how the police function, is critical. That's self-determination. And so I think it's definitely important to put the folks to have the lived experiences of being the most impacted by police impunity, definitely not only at the center of the movement, but on these police boards too. So I'll just stop there.
Agreed.
Thank you. Go ahead, Quisha.
And just thinking about how that does not exist now in larger society. So there's a huge need. It must. Just ditto to what Jasmine said.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna go. Em, do you have anything to add to that? Oh, everything's been said. Okay, so I'm gonna go and see what else is here. That was kind of answered. I'm just perusing through. Okay, this one. Someone said dual power, but that's stopping the state to just come in and take down everything because they have the power right now. I don't think we can build parallel power without trying to smash the existing power structure.
I mean, I would say I agree, which is why I think we need to be doing both. We need to be building our own and smashing what exists.
Jasmine, Keisha, do you want to add to that?
No.
All right. Okay. And I think for our last question, as we wind down, how do you suggest young people in college organize for and demand community control on their campuses? What relationships need to be built between marginalized folks at school and recognize we are also part of the neighborhood cities policing apparatus?
I can start. So I know there are a couple of Students for a Democratic Society chapters across the nation who have taken on this campaign for campus community control of the police. And I can only speak to the UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, SDS branch. And one thing that they do is, in addition to fighting for community control on their campus, they also support our campaign for CPAC and now ECPS. So I think it's important to recognize, like, especially as students, that yes, you are also, as the question said, let me make sure I'm getting it right. I don't know where the question went. You are like part of the reason why the campus police exist, but also you are in a position to fight for community control of the police. I mean, at the University of Chicago, it's that the campus has the second largest police force to the Vatican. And so because of that, when I was a student there, I felt it was my responsibility to do something, right? The fact that my tuition dollars are going to support this brutal and terrible private police force kind of spurred me to take action. And that's actually why I started doing work with the Alliance, the Chicago Alliance, recognizing that as a student, there is a lot that I can do. And so I definitely see campaigns like that popping up on campuses across the country.
Thank you. So we're, as I said, winding down. So I just want to give the speakers, the lovely speakers today, a chance to give their final thoughts, 2 minutes each about, and we can start with Keisha.
Apologies. Thank you all for your time. Again, there's a lot that we should continue to discuss to make sure our respective positions are clear, and that we ultimately get to liberation, and just international solidarity and creating the new world that we all wish to see. And apologies, but I do have to hop off now for another call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Keisha. Jasmine?
Sure. I didn't prepare anything, so I'm just going to freestyle. Thank you again to the DC Alliance for inviting me to speak today. Thank you so much for the folks who ask questions, folks who have a differing viewpoint, but still want to, engage in a healthy dialogue and a debate. I think that's always fantastic and always healthy for movements. I think community control of the police is so necessary immediately today. And I think it's so important for us. I saw another question that somebody said, how do I start? How do you really do something like this? I think it's so important to look up campaigns locally, organizations locally who are doing this work. I'll put in a plug for the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We refounded it in 2019 in Chicago. I don't know the exact number of chapters off the top of my head, but I know we have at least a dozen chapters who are doing this work for community control of the police, including in DC, Chicago, there's work in Florida, there's work in California. So definitely please get involved. And definitely try to engage at a grassroots level and really build up this campaign, right? We know that it's going to take people power to win community control of the police, and we need to get our people organized. And community control of the police is a vital first step to doing that. So thank you. If you want to learn more about the Chicago Alliance, we're on Instagram and Twitter at CAARPR now, and we're also on Facebook. So check us out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan. And final thoughts.
Sure. So, one, just shout out to the incredible panelists before me. I was over here taking notes, so it's just been an incredible opportunity. Thank you for having me. But I would say the it is imperative, it is paramount that we directly struggle for power. Many times, as people who have been abused and misused by power, we have an aversion to seizing power. But we must seize power. You cannot destroy a thing, you cannot abolish a thing without having power over that thing. So my organization has fought for 5 years to remove police from schools. We eventually won the victory. Fantastic. But we still didn't have power over the police, which is why, even though they're not walking around the halls, somebody can come call them and they can bust in there and do what they want, because we didn't actually win power over them to ultimately stop it. So even in the victories of decrim, of defunding, of decarcerating, and other important strategies toward weakening the prison industrial complex, the ultimate goal is to take power as a community so that we can ultimately abolish them, not wait and hope that someone with power is influenced by us enough to do it, but that we can do it for ourselves and then build the thing that we want. And so I think community control is the way to go over the police, but community control for Black people in every sector of our lives.
Thank you so much. Okay, so once again, I really want to thank the Bloys for interpreting. Thank you so much for that. The panelists, Jasmine, and Quisha. And really, what I want to say to end this is, we're trying to liberate ourselves, but we need to be organized, and everyone who is in the oppressed class has a part, right? We can't have a revolution if we don't have the masses politically clear on what the issues are, what are the core issues. And on our way to revolution, we have to try and seize power. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming today to this event, and hope you come to the next one. Thank you.